We're tackling Beyond Good and Evil, understanding why this work is still shaking things up over a century later.
Nietzsche throws out the rule book. He uses aphorisms like well-aimed darts to expose the illusions we live by. Instead of one long argument, imagine a captivating play, each section with a title that pulls you in. Take the section on the prejudices of philosophers. Nietzsche argues that even the most celebrated thinkers, the ones claiming objectivity, are actually driven by their own unconscious biases, their unexamined morality.
But how do we even start to uncover those hidden biases, especially in ourselves?
That's where those aphorisms come in handy.
Okay.
Nietzsche uses them like scalpels, dissecting our assumptions about truth, morality, even our own motivations. He's not afraid to ask the dangerous questions, the ones most people shy away from, questioning whether truth is always good or whether some truths might actually be harmful.
Isn't knowledge always power?
That's exactly the kind of assumption Nietzsche wants us to examine. He argues that truth, for it to be truly valuable, must affirm life. This has huge implications for how we approach knowledge and discovery. Should we pursue knowledge, even if it has the potential to destroy us?
It makes you think about things like, say, the development of certain technologies, or even the things we choose to focus on in our own lives.
These are questions that are as relevant today as they were in Nietzsche's time. But it's not just the nature of truth that Nietzsche tackles. He also forces us to confront the hidden motives behind our thinking. He argues that even our philosophical ideas are often just elaborate justifications for our own deepest desires and beliefs, even if we don't realize it.
It's like our philosophies are confessions in disguise. What are the unexamined assumptions shaping your life?
It's a question we could all benefit from asking ourselves. Nietzsche uses irony, vivid imagery, and these thought-provoking aphorisms to challenge everything we think we know about ourselves and the world.
But if even our philosophies are suspect, where do we go from there?
Nietzsche wants us to acknowledge that truth isn't some static thing we find lying around like a lost object. He uses this image of philosophers' ideas being like plants, growing not from pure reason, but from the soil of their personal, often unexamined morality.
So our philosophies are less about objective truth and more like intellectual flower arrangements, trying to make our own personal biases look presentable.
In a way, yes. He's saying we all have these underlying drives, these demons and kobolds, as he calls them, that shape our thinking far more than we realize. And rather than pretending they don't exist, he wants us to confront them head on.
It's like that moment you realize your taste in music, books, even romantic partners might say more about your own insecurities and desires than any kind of objective standard of good taste. A little humbling, to say the least.
Precisely. And Nietzsche takes this even further, suggesting we rely on false judgments, simplifications of reality, just to function in the world. He uses the example of numbers. We act like they're these fixed, absolute things, but they're actually just tools we've invented to impose order on a reality that's constantly in flux. Or think about how we label colors. We call a wall white, even though it's reflecting 1,000 different shades at any given moment, depending on the light.
But if we accept that, then how do we know what to trust? How do we avoid falling into harmful delusions?
He'd say we need to constantly evaluate our beliefs against their effect on our lives, individually and collectively.
So a belief that helps us thrive, to become more generous, more courageous, more fully alive, might be considered truer in a sense than one that leads to stagnation or destruction, even if it's not objectively accurate in some scientific sense.
That's one way to interpret it. It's not about throwing out reason entirely, but recognizing its limitations. Our rational minds are always working in service of something deeper, something more primal. And for Nietzsche, that something should be the will to life, to growth, to becoming the best versions of ourselves.
Okay, I'm starting to see where he's going with this beyond good and evil thing. It's not about denying morality, but questioning the categories we use to define it in the first place.
Exactly. And this is where Nietzsche's work gets truly radical, and for many, quite challenging. He argues that even those qualities we typically label as bad can have a role to play in a flourishing life. Think about a time you felt a surge of anger in response to an injustice. That anger, channeled correctly, can be a powerful motivator for change, for setting boundaries, for standing up for yourself and what you believe in.
So it's not about pretending we don't have these so-called negative emotions, but learning to understand their purpose, their potential to be a source of energy and growth.
Exactly. It's about embracing the fullness of our being, the light and the shadow, and finding ways to integrate them into a more holistic understanding of ourselves. It's about becoming what Nietzsche calls philosophers of dangerousness, those willing to question everything, even our most cherished beliefs, in pursuit of a more authentic and courageous way of living. Nietzsche challenges us to see the limitations of viewing the world through these simplistic binaries of good versus evil, right versus wrong.
So instead of just labeling something or someone as bad, we need to look deeper, try to understand the context, the motivations, the complexities involved.
Precisely. And to do that, we need to cultivate a certain fearlessness, a willingness to question even our most deeply held beliefs. Remember, Nietzsche sees philosophy as an active, even dangerous pursuit, not just a comfortable armchair activity.
So less theorizing, more experimenting with how we see and interact with the world.
Exactly. He uses this metaphor of the frog perspective to describe how limited our viewpoint can be if we only see things from our own narrow perspective. To truly move beyond good and evil, we need to cultivate a more expansive way of seeing, one that allows for nuance, contradiction, and the ever-changing nature of reality.
It's like that saying, everyone you meet is fighting a battle you know nothing about. Nietzsche would probably add, and so are you, even if you haven't admitted it to yourself yet.
And that's where true self-awareness, the kind Nietzsche champions, comes into play. It's not just about identifying our strengths, but also confronting our shadow sides, those parts of ourselves we'd rather keep hidden.
Because those shadow sides, those demons and kobolds we talked about, they're not going anywhere, are they? Ignoring them just gives them more power.
Precisely. Nietzsche believed that by confronting our shadow sides, by integrating those darker impulses into a more holistic understanding of ourselves, we tap into a tremendous source of energy and creativity. It's about recognizing that even our so-called flaws can be sources of strength if we're willing to do the work.
So it's not about striving for some kind of perfect, idealized version of ourselves, but rather embracing the messy, complicated, often contradictory beings that we are.
Exactly. And that's where true freedom lies, according to Nietzsche. It's not about adhering to a rigid set of moral codes, but about living in alignment with our own unique nature, even if that means challenging conventional wisdom.
But this all sounds pretty daunting. Where do we even begin?
It starts with self-awareness. Pay attention to your reactions, your judgments, especially those things that trigger strong emotional responses. What are those reactions telling you about your own unexamined beliefs, your own frog perspectives? Remember, Nietzsche believed that a life worth living is a life of constant growth, of pushing boundaries, of questioning everything.
Where can our listeners go to learn more, not just about Nietzsche, but about how to apply these ideas to their own lives?
Well, picking up Beyond Good and Evil is a great starting point. Don't be intimidated by its reputation. Take your time, read with an open mind, and most importantly, don't be afraid to ask your own dangerous questions along the way. Remember, the pursuit of knowledge, of self-discovery, it's a lifelong journey, not a destination. Keep exploring, keep questioning, and who knows what amazing insights you might uncover along the way.